This lecture focused on the physical factors that influence terrestrial biomes. There are two main questions that we are going to answer. The first of which is, what are the influences on climate? There are 6 factors that we're going to explore today. Solar radiant fluxes. The Earth receives a small portion of the sun's energy which can be either absorbed or reflected. Energy from the sun is the main driver for our climate system. Temperature signature and absorbance is the largest component of solar usage, followed by the water cycle. Latitude. Uneven heating of the Earth's surface causes the general patterns of air circulation and rainfall, but it is not the only factor. Global patterns of air circulation in conjunction with latitude. Warm air moves away from the equator, then gradually cools and falls. This creates Hadley, Ferrel, and polar cells that are contained within latitudinal boundaries. The Coriolis effect acts on wind patterns. This effect causes wind to swirl clockwise in the southern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. Global rainfall patterns. Areas of low pressure where warm air is rising generally experience higher levels of precipitation, while high pressure areas where cool air is descending are associated with fair climates. At the equator, there is a wall of clouds with doldrums. Towards 30 degrees latitudes, the air loses moisture and dries out. Annual precipitation data corresponds to precipitation trends based on latitude.
Surface topography. The rain shadow effect is when a mountain range has relatively little precipitation due to prevailing winds that cause the windward side to lose moisture, which results in the leeward side being dry. Lake effect snow occurs when cool air masses pass over expanses of warmer, moist bodies of water, leading to higher levels of precipitation on the downwind side of the body of water. A good example of lake effect snow is the Great Lakes. Elevation is another factor. Being at a high altitude can be analogous to living at a northern latitudinal position. Mineral and nutrient availability. The 3 broad categories of soil composition are sand, clay, and silt. Soil nutrient availability affects the type of plants present. Biomes are the assemblage of species that occupy the same geographical location characterized by temperature, precipitation, latitude, altitude, and mineral resources. These are some of the points on biomes covered in class. The tropical rainforest is characterized by high rainfall and low seasonal variation. Other forests differ with cooler temperatures and more seasonality. Within grasslands, more precipitation is correlated with taller grasses, higher productivity, and more biodiversity. We encourage you to review this material individually, as the content on biomes can be quite extensive. Our second question is, what acts as a predictor for biomes and their net primary productivity? Net primary productivity increases with higher temperatures and precipitation levels. This can be seen in the graph depicting annual precipitation in relation to annual temperature. The upper right corner is the peak of net primary productivity.
Earth's oceans are responsible for an overwhelming amount of abiotic and biotic processes on this planet. 71% of Earth's surface is covered by oceans, which compromises up to 97% of all the water in the biosphere. The ocean also supports a great amount of biodiversity. 40% of all global primary production occurs between 0 to 200 meters below the ocean surface. Using chlorophyll as a proxy for net primary production, highly productive phytoplankton communities are often found to be concentrated on the western edges of continents due to upwelling and nutrient availability.
A series of forces impact the spatial patterns of biodiversity distribution across the oceans. One of the main forces is ocean circulation, driven largely by winds blowing across and mixing the ocean's waters. Because of the Earth's rotation, winds don't blow in a straight line. Winds in the northern hemisphere are deflected to the right from their point of origin, while winds in the southern hemisphere are deflected to the left. This is known as the Coriolis effect and results in a circular pattern of ocean currents. Upwelling zones occur where winds blow surface waters away from the western coast of continents and cause waters to diverge along the equator. Deeper waters rise up to replace what was displaced at the surface. These deeper waters are rich with nutrients from organic matter, such as deceased organisms that have sunk to lower levels of the ocean. Downwelling is a similar mixing action of ocean waters, where the directions are reversed and surface water sinks to replace water at lower depths. This occurs when surface waters are forced down as they are blown into the eastern coast of continents and flanks equatorial upwelling where currents converge. Downwelling leads to organic matter sinking faster than it otherwise would.
Ocean water can be characterized by a variety of different gradients of temperature, salinity, density, and pressure. The thermocline is the given depth at which temperature drastically decreases with increasing depth. The halocline is the depth at which salinity rapidly increases, as denser, more salinated water is found at lower depths. And the pycnocline is the boundary between colder, denser bottom water and warmer, less dense surface water. Surface water circulation is driven largely in part by surface winds, while deep ocean circulation is driven by thermohaline circulation, which is often described by the analogy of the ocean conveyor belt.
Variations in the intensity of these forces in different parts of the oceans leads to unique zones, with characteristics that support various life forms specific to each zone. The neritic zone is the area along coasts making up 8% of the world's oceans. It is species-rich and characterized by interactions between land and sea. The littoral zone is the shallower region within the neritic zone with depths between 0 to 100 meters. It is home to organisms adapted to high degrees of abiotic variation and exposure, as well as anchored organisms. A classic example is the rocky intertidal zone. Open ocean is known as the pelagic zone. The pelagic zone is divided into photic and aphotic zones based on light penetration. The dividing line is roughly 100 to 200 meters in depth. Light in the photic zone supports primary production via photosynthesis and phytoplankton. Life in the aphotic zone largely relies on sinking organic matter with the exception of chemosynthetic ecosystems which acquire nutrients through deep thermal vents.
There's lots of water on Earth, but less of that is fresh water, and even less is water we have access to, such as that in rivers and lakes.
River structure includes gliders along the straight portions, riffles along the curves, point bars also along the curves, and riparian zones along the edges, which help prevent erosion.
Limnology is the study of inland waters, which includes rivers, lakes, streams, and so on.
Limnologists study residence time, which is the measure of how long it takes water to move through a water body. For example, if there is a volume of 100 units in a lake and there is 50 units of inflow and 50 units of outflow, the residence time of that lake is 2 years.
Persistent freshwater features have two sources, precipitation and aquifers or springs. Some persistent freshwater features include the Great Lakes like that around Michigan, fjord lakes between mountains, Rift Valley lakes in valleys, and artificial lakes such as dams, reservoirs, etc.
Some ephemeral freshwater features for seasonal water are mountain lakes from snowmelts, vernal pools from rain and snowmelts, and they are important for amphibians to lay their eggs. Glacial lakes from glaciated snowmelts. Eolic lakes from wind depressions, and they are formed by condensation. Epichelf lakes from sea ice meltwater. Subterranean lakes and caves. Vley lakes, which are seasonal water table shifts. So they happen from precipitation, and then they can dry up from evaporation. And volcanic crater lakes from vent seeps.
The movement of rivers can also form ephemeral features called oxbow lakes. Fast-moving water is hitting one curve of the river and not hitting the other curve. Over time, the fast-moving water eats away and causes erosion on one side, while the other side experiences sediment buildup. This makes for very curvy rivers over time, and eventually these two curves will meet each other and cause one bend of the river to break off into what's known as an oxbow lake.
Freshwater bodies have different zones. The littoral zone, near the land, the limnetic zone, which is farther out, the photic zone, where photosynthesis occurs, the aphotic zone, where there is no light, so no photosynthesis can occur, and the benthic zone on the bottom.
There are different kinds of lakes. Holomictic lakes have high turnover, while meromictic lakes have almost none.
There are two types of waters, oligotrophic, which is clear, and eutrophic, which is green and murky. And this is due to the levels of primary productivity, where oligotrophic has low, and eutrophic has an abundance of nutrients and a high productivity.
Natural selection is the process by which genotypic characteristics becomes more or less common in a population as a function of differential reproduction of their bearers. Let's look at an example, the swordbill hummingbird and the passiflora mixed. So what about them? What is their relationship? What is evolutionary arms race? Species, in order to evolve, must accumulate adaptations that are favorable for the environment in which they live. As these species evolve, other species that are in close symbiotic relationship with these species must also evolve. As one species evolves, the other species it interacts with must also evolve. Selective forces. A selective force is a drive to increase frequency or better adapted alleles of a niche within a population. They come in both physical and biological forms. The physical factors of swordbill hummingbird and passiflora mixta are similar: temperature, precipitation, and soil type. The biological factors are different. Speed and diet diversification is important for the hummingbird, whereas appearance and pollination is important for the flower. There are a few things you need for natural selection: a source of variation, changes in allele frequencies, and a drive. Mutations are changes in DNA as a result of copying errors, mechanical damage, and exposure to carcinogens and radiation. Changes in allele ratios are due to random sampling, fitness, selection, bottlenecking, etc. In our example, there is mixing and changes of allele frequencies due to transfer alleles from one population to another. A drive is a force that pushes the gene pool towards a higher fitness. In our example, there will be a shift towards longer beaked hummingbirds and narrower nectar chambers of flowers, giving rise to species such as swordbill hummingbird and passiflora mixta. Let's summarize everything. In order for a flower to deter insects, they evolve longer channels through natural selection. The hummingbird, which relies heavily on the flower, co-evolved a long beak through natural selection, making the passiflora mixta its limitless food source.
The Hardy-Weinberg principle states that if no evolutionary forces act upon the population, the allele frequencies remain constant. Conditions required for the Hardy-Weinberg principle include random mating, no migration, equal fitness, no mutations. Lamarckism. Notion that an organism can pass on acquired abilities and characteristics to their offspring. In our example, the sword-billed hummingbird must use its legs rather than its beak to prune its feathers. Speciation is a phenomenon where populations must evolve into different species. There are several parts to the mechanism of speciation.
Hi, my name is Daniel Cotillo,
Hi, I'm Tatiana DeRosa.
and we'll be talking to you today about adaptation phenotypic plasticity. Now, when thinking about adaptation phenotypic plasticity, the best place to start is with natural selection, which acts only on individuals, and favored traits lead to reproductive success within individuals and increasing the allele frequency within a population. And it's important to note that populations evolve, not the individual. Since we're talking about natural selection, I think the best place to look is the person who started it all, Mr. Charles Darwin, and his trips to the Galapagos. Darwin studied finches, which happen to be a great example of demonstrating what a fitness landscape is. A fitness landscape relates genotype, phenotype, and overall fitness of a species. You can have a static fitness landscape where a population occupies a single optimum, or a dynamic fitness landscape where populations occupy multiple or a dynamic fitness landscape where populations occupy multiple optimums. So now, as you can see in a dynamic fitness landscape, the population is leaving a local optimum and moving on to another optimum. Now, this causes the community to vary, but overall will lead to greater fitness at the end.
This then relates to the topic of adaptation, which is the dynamic evolutionary process where traits develop in response to various conditions which contribute to the overall fitness and survival of an individual. Adaptation is also the process that leads to heritability, where a trait with an important role within a population is maintained and evolved by natural selection. The three aspects of an adapted trait are as follows: structural, which relates to morphology; behavioral, which relates to an organism's instinct and tendencies; and physiological, which can be split into two categories. First is homeostatic function, which deals with growth development and temperature regulation, or a special function that are dependent on the specific organism. A prime example of adaptation are Darwin's finches, where those on islands differed from ones in Ecuador. Their beaks varied in size and shape due to the diet each finch had in their respective location. If there is rapid or variable changes in the environment, it may lead to phenotypic plasticity.
Phenotypic plasticity is just the ability to express different phenotypes. A phenotype is the sum of the individual's genotype plus the environment. Regulatory genes can be turned on and off with given stimuli, which allows individuals to respond to any environmental change. This can all be explained with something called a norm of reaction, a set of phenotypes expressed by a single genotype across a range of environmental conditions. Here we see two individuals with different genotypes. As the environment changes, so does the phenotype. But looking at the circle and the square, we can see that across the line, they have the same phenotype, despite being in two different environmental conditions.
Acclimation, which can be referred to as adaptive phenotypic plasticity, is a shift in an individual's range of physiological tolerances due to the changes in conditions. It is a reversible process that takes time to occur. However, Drake isn't related to ecology. I just really love him. Anyways, back to ecology. Developmental responses occur when conditions persist for long periods and individuals must modify their attributes for long periods of time, even for the remainder of its life, making these responses irreversible. Now, the important question to ask here is, how do we test if phenotypic variation is due to genotype or the environment? Reciprocal transplant experiments, that's how. They are used to investigate the causes of these differences. There are three results summarized in this graph as either genetic factors, environmental factors, or differentiated responses due to the environment. Additionally to these changes, there are also constraints or trade-offs when it comes to energy and resources. There are compromises within an organism's ability to perform different functions. The end. Thank you.
Water balance by DR and Stephanie. Water balance is the water that comes in and out of the system. More specifically, when it relates to an organism, it pertains to the flow of water between the organism and external environment. Water balance structures the behavior, physiology, ecology, and evolution of almost all animals. When observing the behavior of the wildebeest migration, it is evident that water balance and tolerance underlies the movement from south to north.
The wildebeest migration is one of the largest mammal migration, and it comes at a great cost and risk, as 3% of the population perishes during the movement as a result of exhaustion, dehydration, disease, and predators. Why do these wildebeest go through such an expansive and arduous migratory behavior when the risks are so high?
Initially, the answer was unknown, starting with the fact that the timing of such an event occurred within a 3-month period, and food was still available. It was proposed that rainfall drove the migratory pattern, yet this was a point of contention, as rainfall is dynamic because of the oscillations potentially caused by El Niño. During the dry season, it was discovered that the salinity in parts of Kenya rose exponentially as pictured, becoming undrinkable according to the salinity threshold.
This graph shows that there is definitely a correlation between the amount of rainfall and the amount of grass available, which also coincides with the number of wildebeest and its predators, the lions. But the main cause of wildebeest migration is due to the increase of water salinity, making it undrinkable. It's not water quantity, it's water quality that is important.
Many factors affecting water quality have to come together to put into effect this migration. The following picture demonstrates that not solely rainfall decrease is the cause, but its effects as well, where decreased rainfall causes less fresh water derived from plants, less river flushing, and more evaporation, which negatively impacts the surface water, effectively decreasing water quality and causing the wildebeest to move northward in search of water.
How does
does water balance structure the physiology of animals? Animals have different salinity thresholds, and salinity is the total amount of minerals dissolved in water. Mammals spend considerable energy maintaining blood plasma osmolarity, and consuming highly saline water requires an additional expenditure of energy. Consuming water with high salinity has health consequences, including weight loss, respiration difficulties, behavioral changes, decreased reproduction, lowered survival of offspring, and salt poisoning.
Animals are subdivided in two categories of halotolerance, where they have different mechanisms to deal with salinity. Osmoconformers match that of its surrounding environment, while osmoregulators maintain the same osmolarity of body throughout, despite the environment. This fish, for example, is maintaining an isotonic regulation of ions going out of the fish and water coming in to avoid an extreme influx of salty water, as well as excreting salty urine to counterbalance the extreme salinity of the water.
So how is salt dealt with? There are two ways. There's salt tolerance and salt avoidance. Salt tolerance requires physiological and biochemical adaptations for maintaining protoplasmic viability under electrolyte accumulation. Salt avoidance requires physiological and structural adaptations to minimize or exclude cellular salt concentrations.
Lastly, we're going to show an example of evolution, where the marine iguana were initially land mammals who by necessity evolved to inhabit the marine territory as well. We would like to thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoy.
Energy in ecosystems. Energy is fuel for life functions, stored within consumable and digestible food items. Trophic levels depict categories of organisms which all consume energy in its nth form since production. Food chains are simplified depictions of energy transfer directly through trophic levels. Trophic efficiency or inefficiency refers to how much energy has been retained or lost since its production. Not all energy within a food item is used directly for the consumer's growth. In fact, 10% of consumed energy becomes biomass. The remaining 90% goes towards metabolic activities or heat production. This inefficiency limits the length of food chains, leading to fewer and smaller top predators. Trophic hierarchy is the organization of trophic levels into classes based on their role and location within a food chain. A food web is simply a more realistic depiction of all the energy interactions within an ecosystem, a combination of all its food chains. At the base of the trophic hierarchy, we have primary producers. Autotrophs create consumable energy in the form of organic matter from an energy source or inorganic matter. Autotrophs may use the sun, chemicals such as sulfur, or stones such as nitrogen. After primary producers, we have primary consumers or heterotrophs, which consume the autotrophs themselves, breaking down complex organic compounds into simpler ones. These interactions within ecosystems result in food webs, which may reflect population numbers, biomass at each level, or energy transfer. Please note that species may occupy more than one trophic level or consume species from multiple trophic levels, which results in immense multidimensionality. Sometimes food webs can even be inverted, which results in seemingly higher energy at higher trophic levels than lower ones. This extra energy is usually from very quick events, such as a surge in the prey population or wide-range foraging. Some species are more crucial to the prosperity of a food web and stability of trophic hierarchy than others. A keystone species is a fundamental species for the structure of its food web. Without it, everything would be different. Otters are an example of a keystone species in the California kelp beds. When their population declines, sea urchins, the otter's prey, thrive. When sea urchins thrive, more kelp is consumed, which creates an urchin barren. Drastic changes in the composition of the California kelp beds result from the presence or absence of otters. The North American tallgrass prairie ecosystem exhibits other ways which individuals may influence entire ecosystem composition. In bottom-up limitation, lower trophic levels inhibit the growth of upper ones. In top-down limitation, higher trophic levels inhibit the growth of lower ones. These effects always ripple. In our example, a lower mouse population would result in less of their prey, grasshoppers, being eaten. More grasshoppers would result in an overconsumption of plants, causing a decrease in the primary producers. In conclusion, energy flows through an ecosystem via food webs, which are organized into trophic levels that reflect species efficiency and metabolically using energy or converting to biomass. Only 10% of energy from one trophic level to the next can be incorporated into biomass. And lastly, primary producers are the sources of all consumable energy, and keystone species are essential in shaping the flow of energy through an ecosystem. Various bottom-up and top-down limitations may influence energy and biomass and different trophic levels.
Here we go with optimal foraging theory. Alright, first part of this lecture talks about the marginal value theorem, and that's basically a way to plot the optimal time an animal spent looking for food based on how much time they're spending actually looking for the food and time spent obtaining it, and the profitability of that food in terms of energy intake. Okay, so we plot that with a graph as shown here, and there's again two important times to consider: time searching for food and the time in the patch. Time searching for food shows no energy intake, but time in patch is when the actual energy is obtained. So it kind of looks something like this. You use a tangent line to find the optimal time based on how long the animal is traveling between forest patches. So if it's short, then obviously the energy intake won't be as great as if the travel time was longer. So what's the point of this? Well, it helps us to track a lot of population dynamics and tells us a lot about the adaptations that specific animals use to get their food as efficiently as possible. And yes, it's time for more grass. Now we're going to move into the predator functional response, and that shows the predator-prey. It's a way of highlighting the predator-prey dynamics. There are, three main types. The first one shows rapid prey consumption, which obviously isn't sustainable. If you eat the prey too fast, then the prey populations are going to go down, and likewise, the predator populations will soon follow. So it's kind of like a roller coaster of animal death. Here we have type 2, in which the prey consumption is steady and then levels off to a sustainable amount. And then we have type 3. This is more to show a learning curve in which an animal is switching types of food. At first, it's not very profitable, they're not getting the hang of it, but then all of a sudden it becomes a little easier, like evolutionary ecology.
So the next part of the lecture is optimal foraging theory. So this is seeing that hunting and feeding behavior is an optimized process. So individuals that can maximize their energy intake when energy is limited will be favored by natural selection. So this brings us to the equation. E, as we can see, is the amount of energy from a prey item. H would be handling time, and this starts once prey has been spotted, so capture, killing, eating, etc. And S is the search time for that prey item. So what we can gather from this is that a short handling time relative to search time is normal for a generalist, whereas a long handling time relative to search time is normal for a specialist. So generalists are typically found in unproductive environments and they have a broad diet, whereas specialists are found in productive environments and they can afford to have a narrow diet. So in order to increase handling time, we're kind of over. Okay.